I'm reading a book for this time of year as we approach Remembrance Sunday. It's titled The War of the World. It traces 100 plus years from before 1914 to today, and it looks at the complicated reasons for conflict, the power struggles, the economic, geographic and racial tensions. It's not the kind of book with a simple storyline. And in reading it last thing at night, I usually read a few pages and that's it. It also has very small print. But if I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm not dreaming and thinking about our building project that we're having in the house at the moment, then I try reading a few more, and Maggie will usually get a book out and read a few pages of the book she's reading. We've been sorting through books that we've been bought or been given over the years. Tim, our son who lives in Switzerland, came to see us after he'd been in a conference in Cambridge a few weeks ago, and he sat down in what has been a study and is going to turn into a wet room, and was going through all sorts of books of ours, mostly theological books, and deciding for us which ones we ought to keep and which ones we could take the back cover off and recycle the paper inside and put the covers in a bin. He was very helpful. We got through most of them, but we've had a lot more to pack up since then. This is a good time of year to think about the different events across the world that we struggle to understand. And I can't tell you whether I'm a great deal clearer from reading this hefty book. I'm nearly halfway through, but that's about page 270. But I've often tried at this time of year to read a book like that. Laurie, is it a book you've read? You haven't read that one yet. Laurie gets through book after book on all sorts of different subjects, so I'll have to lend it to him, won't I? Next Sunday, we will remember those who died in World War I and II and other major conflicts, and what is going on at the moment in different parts of the world. Things that sadden us, grieve our hearts, make us angry, a whole kaleidoscope of different feelings. Maybe you've watched the series of programs presented by David Olusoga. Anybody been watching them? Looking at the history of people who lived in two different houses. One in London, in Mayfair in London, one in Berlin. And he's been telling the story of how residents of those two houses were caught up in events beyond their control. And you can, I guess, imagine the kind of things that were happening at that stage in the history, particularly of Europe. Caught up in events that affect people right across the generations in all sorts of different ways. Our two readings today present two different pictures of what it is to be a leader, a ruler. First of all, you have a Babylonian dynasty with kings Nebuchadnezzar and his successor Belshazzar. And then we have the king that we follow, whose kingship we celebrate at this time of year, Jesus Christ, King Jesus. So we have Nebuchadnezzar, the absolute ruler, feared, dreaded. Those whom the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. That kind of absolute power. And in the book I've been reading, I've just moved from reading about Stalin, who is a real example of that kind of absolute power, and I'm now moving on to the rise of Nazism in Germany. and other similar effects on other nations around Germany, not far away. Absolute power, a reign of terror. We often ask, don't we? We often ask questions about how rulers in the last century's history came to be in their positions of power. Very real questions. We're asking questions this very week with the presidential election on Tuesday in the States. Some of the papers have been asking that question. What kind of leader will we have depending on which of the two candidates is elected? In our Bible reading, Nebuchadnezzar was stopped short when he became arrogant and proud until he acknowledged God's ultimate power and sovereignty. That Song of David had very much that picture of God's ultimate power and sovereignty, didn't it? He stopped short. And then in turn, his successor Belshazzar was stopped in his tracks when he'd set himself up as the King of Kings, parading booty that had been seized from the temple in Jerusalem, treasures that had been brought to Babylon, paraded in that banquet, that enormous banquet, to symbolize his power. And the so-called gods that they made for themselves, made from metal, wood, and stone, carved or cast to their own design, and then prayed to. In Belshazzar's case, he was stopped in his tracks by the writing on the wall. That's a phrase that's become part of our English language, isn't it? The writing on the wall. Daniel is remembered in the Babylonian court for his ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve different problems. He turns down the offer of the king's gifts that were being offered as a kind of inducement for interpreting the writing on the wall. In the end, he is honored with them after he's given that interpretation, which might surprise us that he accepted that honor when we hear what the message was. God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. It's a very clear picture, isn't it, of God having the final word. The other reading, which is an extra one, which is the one of the readings set for this Sunday, the fourth before Advent or All Saints Sunday, portrays another king. Jesus Christ, King Jesus. That's what the word, the title Christ means. It isn't Jesus' surname, Jesus Christ. Christ means king. Here is the king who hears the complaint of Mary and Martha. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. How would the Babylonian kings, Nebuchadnezzar or Belshazzar, have reacted to a complaint about their kingship, their reign, their action or inaction? How would they have reacted to that kind of question? Here is a king vulnerable with real feelings. Jesus is deeply moved when he's taken to Lazarus' grave. He has real tears. He is moved from his depths with heartbroken, indignant tears, for death is the ultimate affront to a God who is the life giver. Those deep, shuddering tears are what God's strength actually looks like. That's a little quote from a book titled The Language of Tears. Here is a king whose feelings are transparent. The crowd can see Jesus' love. It's obvious, it's clear to all of them. Here is a king who takes a risk. This prayer will not be answered. Martha is all too aware that Lazarus has been dead for 4 days, buried in the tomb. Jesus believes that God can bring him back to life, that his Father can do that the body will not have decomposed. But Jesus has to trust his Father. And that same trust a few weeks later was very personal to him. He himself would be arrested, tried, crucified, buried. And what then? Here is a king who can command someone to resume life. The opposite of commanding someone to be put to death. Where might we find Daniel-like figures, people today? People who have access to those who are in leadership. People of insight and wisdom and intelligence, the ability to read the signs of the times. After I'd prepared what I was going to say today, while Maggie was preparing for going to Oxenton this morning, I dipped into the Gloucester Diocese website and the podcasts, different conversations that are recorded there. I dipped into a conversation that Bishop Rachel had with several different people. Our leaders in our different Church of England dioceses all around the country very often carry responsibility for thinking about, for following up different issues in the community. In Bishop Rachel's case, she has responsible for thinking about prisons and what happens in them, what the effect is on people who end up in prison. As a member of the House of Lords, she has the opportunity of speaking about issues to do with the prison service. She visits prisons in Gloucestershire to give her first-hand knowledge and insight. Who are the people in our own church who have opportunities of speaking about local issues in our various local councils, at parish or borough or county level? How do people earn the opportunity to speak from a Christian perspective and be heard? People who are involved with the local community. Next Sunday morning, around this sort of time as 11 o'clock approaches, there will, if it's anything like previous years, be an enormous crowd gathering outside the War Memorial. Enormous crowd of all ages. What an opportunity to speak from a Christian perspective. I think Tim is leading that service. Can anybody remember? Is it Tim? Let's pray for Tim. The service is quite heavily scripted, but he might just be able to squeeze in here or there something. What an opportunity. I was used to find that Remembrance Sunday was one of those opportunities in the year when I was a rector of a parish on the edge of Leicester for nearly 20 years. One of the ways we kind of earned a hearing was to keep 11 o'clock at 11 o'clock with the silence. It's very strange, but every year there was that opportunity on November the 11th and on Armistice Day and whenever Remembrance Sunday fell, to speak from a Christian perspective about some of what was going on in the world all around us. What are other opportunities like that people in our church may have? Not just the clergy, but others who find themselves in positions where they can just quietly do that. Not talking necessarily about their Christian faith, but giving a perspective that's born out of deep faith. Well, that's a little bit of an aside. I was thinking about that while Maggie was finishing off her sermon for Oxenton. Our readings today portray a contrast, don't they? A contrast of kings. Kings who appeared to have power over life and death, but in the end didn't. And Jesus, who appeared to be powerless in the cross of Good Friday, but was raised to life, never to die again, and give his true life to all who are open to receive it. Jesus and those Babylonian kings model quite different styles of kingship, don't they?